Las Vegas, Nevada, October 22nd, 1968, 10:17 p.m. Dean Martin had been singing Everybody Loves Somebody for 14 years when he forgot the words. Not a line, not a verse, all of them. The entire architecture of a song he had recorded in 1964 that had gone to #1, that had knocked the Beatles off the top of the charts, that he had performed an estimated 630 times in the 4 years since, gone, cleanly and completely, in the middle of the second verse, as though someone had quietly removed the file from the drawer where it had been living and left the drawer open and empty. He stood at the microphone. He did not fake it. He did not hum the tune while mouthing approximate syllables, which was the specific maneuver that performers used when lyrics fled mid-song and they needed a few seconds to retrieve them. He did not signal the band to start the verse again, which was the other maneuver, the more confident one, the one that says, I know this, and I'm going to prove it to you right now. He did not do anything that required him to perform certainty he did not have. He simply stood at the microphone, with the words gone and the orchestra behind him vamping gently through the chord progression, and the Copa room audience of 500 people watching him with the specific suspended attention of a crowd that has noticed something unexpected and is waiting to see what kind of unexpected it turns out to be. And then something happened that nobody in that room had anticipated. Before I tell you what Dean Martin did when the words of his most famous song left him in the middle of the Copa room on a Tuesday night in October of 1968, and why the people who were in that room that night still describe it, 40 years later, as the best performance they ever saw from him. If you have ever been in the middle of something you knew by heart and found it suddenly gone and had to decide what to do with the empty space, subscribe to this channel right now. This is what we do here. The stories about what people are made of when the thing they were relying on disappears. And hit that like button, because what Dean Martin did with an empty microphone in 1968 is the most honest thing he ever did on a stage, and honesty like that deserves to be heard. Now, back to the Copa room, October 22nd, 1968. The words are gone. The orchestra is vamping. 500 people are waiting. 3 days before the show, Dean Paul Martin had received his formal assignment to the 114th Fighter Interceptor Squadron of the California Air National Guard at Fresno. He was 26 years old. He had been flying for 4 years, the way some men are drawn to flying, completely and without ambiguity, as though the air had called and the answer had been yes before the question was fully formed. He was good at it. His instructors had been consistent about this across his training, which was the kind of report that produced in a father's chest the specific compound emotion of pride and terror that only a parent watching their child do something magnificent and dangerous understands from the inside. Dean had been carrying this for 3 days, carrying it the way he carried most things that he considered private, without visible evidence, inside the specific interior space that his performing persona had been designed, across 40 years, to protect. The ease on the outside and the weight on the inside, and the performance of ease serving as the wall between them. He had spoken to Dean Paul the morning of the show. A good call, a warm one. Dean Paul was excited about the assignment, understandably, irrepressibly, in the way of a 26-year-old at the beginning of something he had been working toward. Dean had said the right things, the father things, the things that acknowledged the excitement and the pride, without giving the fear any room. He had hung up the phone and drunk his coffee and driven to the sands and done his afternoon sound check and shaken the hands that needed to be shaken and been Dean Martin, as scheduled, for the 3 hours before the show. And then the show had begun. The first 40 minutes had been the show. The jokes, the songs, the easy, warm patter that made the Copa room feel in the specific way Dean's shows made rooms feel, like the natural state of things rather than a performance. He had been good. He had been professional. He had been, by any available measure, completely himself, in the sense that audiences and critics in the industry understood that phrase. And then Everybody Loves Somebody had started, and he had sung the first verse and the chorus and the beginning of the second verse, and somewhere in the middle of the second verse, between the line about never needing love and the line about something finding you, the words had simply left. He stood at the microphone. Ken Lane, at the piano, registered the silence after approximately 4 bars and vamped, the specific supportive vamp of a musician who knows the man he's playing for and who understands that something is happening that requires patience rather than rescue. The orchestra followed Ken's lead. Dean looked out at the audience, 500 people looking back at him. He lowered the microphone slightly, not to the stand, just down from singing position, held loosely in his hand. The arm dropped, which was the body language not of someone who was about to sing, but of someone who was about to talk. "I forgot the words," he said. The room's response was what the room's response always was when Dean said something unexpected in that specific light, easy tone. They laughed because it sounded like a bit, because Dean Martin saying he forgot the words to his most famous song in the middle of his most famous song was, on the face of it, a very good setup. "No," Dean said, and the quality of his voice in this single syllable was different from his usual stage voice, in the specific way that a person's voice is different when they are saying something true versus something performed. "I actually forgot. I was somewhere else." The laughter subsided. The room recalibrated. 500 people, who had come to the Copa room on a Tuesday night in October for the specific pleasure of Dean Martin doing exactly what they knew Dean Martin did, found themselves in a slightly different room than the one they had entered, a room where something true was apparently about to happen rather than something crafted. Dean looked at the microphone in his hand. He looked at the audience. He seemed, for a moment, to be deciding something, or to have decided something, and to be allowing that decision to complete itself before he acted on it. "My son," he said. "Dean Paul. He got an assignment. Fighter jets." He paused. "California Air National Guard. Starts next month." The room was very quiet. "I spent the whole day trying not to think about it," Dean said. "Didn't work very well." He looked at the microphone again. "He's 26 years old. He can fly a plane better than I can do anything. Better than I can do this, probably, on a given night." He said this without self-deprecation, without the performance of modesty. Simply a statement about relative skills that happened to be accurate. "But he's going to be in a fighter jet," Dean said, "and I'm his father. And those two things turn out to take up a lot of space where lyrics usually go." He stopped. The Copa room was completely, genuinely silent. Not the polite, attentive silence of an audience waiting for the next number, but the specific held silence of people who have been given something they didn't come for and have recognized it as more valuable than what they came for. A woman near the front, accounts placed her at table 3 or 4, which was where the premium tables sat in the Copa room's seating arrangement, began to cry, not dramatically, not in a way that drew attention. Simply the quiet release of someone who has recognized something in what they are hearing, and whose body has registered it before their mind has finished processing it. The woman's name, as established through the oral history research that surfaced several of the accounts from this evening years later, was Margaret Holloway. She was 43 years old, from Wichita, Kansas, in Las Vegas for a wedding anniversary with her husband. Her oldest son was 24 years old and had been drafted 6 months earlier. He was in Vietnam. Dean did not know any of this. He was talking to 500 people and could not know the specific ways in which what he was saying was finding its way into the specific interior spaces of the specific people who were there. That was and is the particular magic and terror of telling a true thing in a room full of strangers. You cannot control where it lands. "He got in a car and drove away yesterday," Dean said, "and I stood at the window and watched him go. The way you do. The way all of you have done, if you have kids, if you've watched them drive away towards something that scares you." He looked up from the microphone. "The thing nobody tells you when you have a kid is that the love doesn't get any bigger than it is when they're about 3 years old. But the world they're in gets bigger and scarier and further from the window you're standing at." He was quiet for a moment. "Anyway," he said, "that's where I was. Instead of here." He raised the microphone back to his lips. He looked at Ken Lane, who had been playing for Dean Martin for 6 years and who understood his rhythms with the specific intimacy of a musician who has spent thousands of hours in the same room as someone's interior life, played the opening bars of Everybody Loves Somebody, not from the beginning, from exactly where Dean had stopped. Dean sang, and here was the thing that the people in the Copa room on October 22nd, 1968, would spend the rest of their lives trying to describe accurately. The song was the same song. The notes were the same notes. The arrangement was the same arrangement Dean Martin had been delivering for 4 years. Nothing about it technically had changed. But the room heard something different, because the room now knew where the song was coming from. They knew that Dean Paul Martin was 26 years old and had been assigned to fly fighter jets. They knew that his father was standing at a microphone in Las Vegas, holding the specific fear that parents hold when their children drive away towards something large and uncertain. They knew that Everybody Loves Somebody sometime was not, for the man singing it on this particular Tuesday night, a commercial proposition about the universality of romantic love. It was something he believed completely. It was something he was singing directly out of the specific place in his chest, where the pride and the fear were sitting together without resolution. The song lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. The ovation lasted 3 minutes and 40 seconds, which was, by several accounts from people who had attended many Copa Room performances over the years, the longest sustained applause they had ever heard in that room. Dean stood at the microphone with the ovation around him, and the ease was back on his face. The ease that was always there, the ease that was not absence of feeling but the specific product of discipline and craft. But it was different now, in the way it is always different after someone has let you see the thing underneath it. It was the same ease, and it was no longer entirely the same ease. He held up one hand, gently, in the gesture that asked the room to let him continue, and the applause settled, and he did the rest of the show. He was very good for the rest of the show. Technically precise, emotionally warm, professionally accomplished. He was Dean Martin, doing what Dean Martin did. But the people in the room that night knew, and would continue to know for the rest of their lives, that the best performance they ever saw from Dean Martin had lasted approximately 90 seconds, taken place in the complete absence of music, and consisted of a famous man telling the truth about where his mind was, instead of hiding behind the words he had temporarily lost. Margaret Holloway, from Wichita, Kansas, found a piece of the Copa Room's branded stationery and wrote down what she had witnessed, more or less immediately after the show, while her husband ordered them both a drink and waited for her to finish writing. She wrote 2 pages. She wrote about what Dean had said, about the feeling in the room during the silence, about the song after the silence and how it was different, about the specific quality of the ovation and why it was different from other ovations she had heard. She kept the 2 pages. She showed them to her son when he came home from Vietnam in 1969. He read them and gave them back to her without speaking, which she said later was the most eloquent response she could have asked for. Her son lived until 2011. She lived until 2014. When she died, the 2 pages were among her personal papers, which her daughter donated to a local historical society, along with various other family documents. The Historical Society, in 2017, produced a small exhibition on mid-century Las Vegas and the cultural life of Americans who visited it during the 1960s. The 2 pages of Copa Room stationery were in a display case near the entrance, mounted beside the brief caption that explained what they described. An archivist named David Brewer, researching the exhibition's primary sources, read the 2 pages and identified the evening from the date and the description, and cross-referenced it with Dean Martin's performance history. He described finding them in a subsequent academic paper about oral history documentation of live entertainment events as the experience of discovering proof of something you previously could only have believed. The pages describe, in specific and reliable detail, he wrote, a performer at the exact moment when the thing he had spent 4 decades perfecting, the construction of an apparently effortless public self, failed him in the most fundamental possible way. And they describe what he did instead, which was nothing. He stood at the microphone. He told the truth. He let 500 people see the thing he had spent 40 years not letting anyone see, and then he found the words again and sang the song. He concluded it was, by all available evidence, his best performance, and it required him to stop performing entirely. Dean Paul Martin flew with the 114th Fighter Interceptor Squadron for 19 years. He died on March 21, 1987, when his National Guard F-4 Phantom went down in the San Bernardino Mountains. Dean Martin received the call backstage at Bally's Casino in Las Vegas, mid-performance. He stopped mid-lyric. He walked off the stage. He did not go back. He never performed again. But on October 22, 1968, 19 years before that, standing at a microphone in the Copa room of the Sands Hotel, with the words of his most famous song temporarily lost, he had done the other thing, the thing the archivist's paper called his best performance, the thing Margaret Holloway wrote 2 pages about, the thing 500 people in Las Vegas on a Tuesday night carried home and kept. He had told the truth about where he was instead of there, about the window, and the car driving away, and the love that doesn't get any bigger than when they're 3 years old. He had told the truth, and then he had found the words again, and sung the song. There is one more piece of this story that belongs in its telling, because it arrived the way the most important pieces of stories often arrive. Years later, through an unexpected channel from someone who had no reason to know it mattered. In 1994, a year before his death, Dean Martin gave what would be one of his last substantial conversations to a journalist named Patricia Welsh, who was writing a retrospective piece on the 40-year career for a publication that was doing a special issue on the icons of the Las Vegas Golden Era. The conversation took place at Dean's home in Beverly Hills over the course of 2 afternoons, and Welsh described him in her subsequent account as quieter than she had expected, not depressed but settled, the specific quality of a man who has put things down and is not carrying them anymore. She asked him, at the end of the second afternoon, whether there were any performances he remembered as his best. Dean thought about this for a long moment. "There was a night," he said, "at the Sands, 1968. I forgot the words to a song in the middle of the song, and instead of faking it or restarting, I just talked, told them where I was, about Dean Paul." He paused. "I'd never done anything like that before. I'd spent 40 years making sure nobody could see behind the thing. And that one night, I couldn't find the words, and there it was, the thing behind the thing." He was quiet. "Did it bother you?" Welsh asked. "Losing control like that?" "Losing control," Dean said. He seemed to turn this over. "No, it didn't feel like losing control. It felt like..." He stopped, started again. "You know what the hardest part of being a performer is? Not the performing. Everybody thinks the performing is the hard part. The hard part is that the performing gets between you and the people you're performing for. They see the performance, you see the performance. And somewhere behind both of those is the thing that made you want to perform in the first place, which is that you wanted to be in the same room as people, really in the same room, not performing at them, but with them." He looked at Welsh. "That night, when the words went, that's what happened. I was just in the room with them. They were in the room with me. Nobody was performing anything." He paused. "It's the only time in 40 years I felt that." Welsh asked if he had tried to replicate it. "You can't replicate it," Dean said. "That's the whole point. The minute you try to plan to tell the truth, you're not telling the truth anymore. You're performing truth, and the people in the room always know the difference." He picked up his drink. The words just left. And for 90 seconds there was nowhere to hide. And the room, he stopped, shook his head. "The room met me there. 500 strangers met me in the exact place I'd spent 40 years trying not to be, and it turned out to be the best place I'd ever been on a stage." He looked out the window for a moment. "I'm glad it happened," he said. "Even now, even after everything. I'm glad I forgot the words that night." Patricia Welsh's article ran in November of 1994. Dean Martin died on December 25, 1995, at the age of 78, alone in his home in Beverly Hills, on Christmas morning. He had performed for the last time 6 years earlier. The last song he sang in public, "The Final Thing," The ending note of a 40-year career built on the appearance of effortlessness was, according to the people who were present, a competent and professional rendition of the songs he had always sung. His best performance remained the 90 seconds in October of 1968 when he forgot the words, when the words were gone and there was nowhere to hide, when 500 strangers met him exactly where he was, and the room held all of them together, all of it, for 90 seconds, which turned out to be enough, which turned out to be more than enough, which turned out, in the accounting of a life spent performing, to be the only moment that required no performance at all. And that is the whole of it. That is the best performance Dean Martin ever gave. It happened when he forgot the words.